Welcome to the U.S. Center. This is our last event of the day, Technology Triumphs, how U.S. policy is accelerating business investment. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium John Podesta, Senior Advisor to the President for Clean Energy Innovation and Implementation.
I'm back, but only for a minute, and to say that this is the last panel of the day, but the best panel of the day. So, in our last session, you heard how the Inflation Reduction Act is helping both the United States and the world decarbonize in a way that prioritizes workers and communities. It's doing that through a government-enabled, but really make no mistake, a private sector-led approach that incentivizes companies to build out clean energy, especially in the place that need the investment the most, and with labor policies that bring workers up and make them part of a new, fairer, clean energy economy. We need to keep that momentum up, and that's what this next event is all about. You'll hear from several companies that are making the clean energy boom happen, from GE Vernova, which recently announced that their first wind turbine off their new assembly line at its Union facility in upstate New York, thanks to the IRA, to Freyr and Norwegian Battery Company that accelerated manufacturing plants in the U.S. because of the IRA, and much more. We're seeing real investment in innovation, and that's powering real growth in the U.S. economy. This is really an important story about why the economy continues to create jobs and continues to grow towards the envy of the world. Now I'm going to turn things over to Eric Holdsworth, the Director of Climate Programs at the Edison Electric Institute, who's going to moderate the first panel. Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you, Senior Advisor Podesta. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Eric Holdsworth, Managing Director of Clean Energy and Environmental Policy at the Edison Electric Institute, or EEI. EEI is very honored today to be a co-host along with our partners at the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, or BCSE, and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES. And we're going to, as Senior Advisor Podesta said, our panel today is going to talk about how U.S. private industry is not only leading the world in reducing carbon, but is leading the world in turning the promise of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act into the reality of tomorrow's technologies that can benefit not only the United States, but more importantly, everyone globally in helping us address the climate crisis. We've got an all-star panel, and I really need to get out of the way so you can hear from far more important and smarter people than I to talk about what they're doing on the ground, and that's really the exciting part of this panel. Our very first panel is going to be moderated by Lisa Jacobson, the president of BCSE, and she's going to be joined in conversation by Pedro Pizarro, president and CEO of Edison International and EEI's chair this year, by Rebecca Kiawa, president and CEO of NextEra Energy Resources, and Scott Strazik, CEO of GE Vernova, who was at one of the earlier events. It's my pleasure now to turn it over to Lisa and get into our first panel. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, again, it's really a pleasure to be here on the opening day of the U.S. Center. Again, my name's Lisa Jacobson, and I'm the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. We put this together with two excellent partners, Edison Electric Institute and the Center, C2ES, one of the major contributors to really strong climate policy. So with that, I'm here to discuss with all of you how the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is influencing your work and how you're serving your customers in the United States, but also all over the world. So I'm going to start first with you, Pedro. Welcome. Your company is based in California. So please tell us a little bit about your clean energy journey, and also, what measures you're taking to meet California's goals, but also meeting our national objectives.
Well, thanks, Lisa, and it's great being here. And for us, our journey began 136 years ago, right? So I think about some of the early transmission lines and hydro system, nuclear, early renewables. But now it's really about how we help the world's fifth largest economy in California get to net zero. So we put out a number of thought pieces and white papers. Our latest one is called Countdown to 2045. And the quick punchline is that good news, the transition is achievable and feasible. A little tougher news, we're running out of time and we need a sense of urgency because the transformation of the economy required is massive. So we see by 2045 in California we'll need 90% of passenger vehicles to be electric, 95% of building, space and water heating to be electric. We're going to need the grid built out to support the renewables and storage to make all of that happen. And so if you think about the rate that we've added grid historically, transmission will need to be added 4 times as fast. Distribution wires will need to be added 10 times as fast. But there's a good punchline here in terms of the use of that technology. We see our average customer actually spending 40% less on their total cost of energy, electric plus gasoline plus natural gas, in 2045 compared to today, just because of the efficiency of electrification. So that's what we're doing in California, is putting out that kind of analysis and then investing particularly on the grid side and working with our suppliers on the renewable and storage side to make that happen. And then just final thought is that, you asked how this applies nationally. Frankly, it applies globally as well. And through our Edison Energy subsidiary, we're helping large corporate clients take on their own sustainability activities throughout North America, Europe, and other places in the world.
Thank you. Rebecca, welcome. Great to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about NextEra. You're the head of the world's largest producer of wind and solar energy. And tell us a little bit more about NextEra Energy Resources and the role that you're playing in the clean energy transition.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here with everybody. And I think this is a terrific topic for COP28. When you think about reduction of carbon emissions globally, the only sector in which we've made progress is the electric sector. And it's a real credit to the 2 gentlemen I'm here with and many of you that have made that commitment possible. Our company's invested about $100 billion over the last 10 years, predominantly in clean energy sources in order to start to achieve this transformation. We plan to invest $100 billion in the next 4 years. Continuing on that journey, and that's across wind, solar, battery storage, all the clean technologies that we need to deploy both in our country and around the world in order to solve this problem. I almost try to sit between these 2 folks, because if you think about who we are, we buy from Scott and GE and Vernova. About 44 gigawatts we've purchased over our history to deploy those technologies, and we serve many customers across the U.S. and Canada. Pedro and the great folks at SCE are some of our greatest customers with over 2,500 megawatts in service today. So we can't wait to continue this journey and really excited to be a part of it and see how we can accomplish it together. And I think Pedro's right. The tools are in our toolkit, but the easy part may have already been done, and now we need to be on the hard journey to really tackle the remaining emissions across our sectors.
Thanks, Rebecca. Scott, welcome to you. So tell us a little bit about GE Vernova and, how you're working to accelerate the clean energy transition and providing affordable and secure clean power for your customers.
You bet, and it's great to be here. I mean, the reality is 1/3 of the world's electricity is powered with our equipment in partnership with our customers in the world. But as we all know, we're all having to recreate ourselves right now, and that's a lot of what's happening with GE Vernova at the moment. And whether that be how we decarbonize our gas business with hydrogen and carbon capture. I think nuclear, we've been talking a lot about nuclear today. We've been in the nuclear industry for 6 decades, but our largest single investment right now is in our 300 megawatt small modular reactor as we really drive a future energy business through nuclear in a different way. We have a very large wind business. Rebecca is our largest single customer in the world. But we're working really hard to industrialize that product to another level to change the way the wind industry has worked in a workhorse way that's needed for it to ultimately have the decarbonized impact it needs to. And our fastest growing business today are our grid businesses, both the physical grid, of expanding the grid and connecting it with renewable sources of energy, but also grid software and helping the grid think differently and navigate through what is a much more complex system. So it's an exciting time, and it's an exciting time for GE Vernova serving our customers on what is an urgent period of time for us.
Thanks. So please tell us a little bit about what brings each of you to the COP. So maybe, Rebecca, we could start with you.
Well, I think the Inflation Reduction Act was clearly a game changer for our industry and certainly for our country. It's terrific in terms of having the long-term visibility for incentives to drive this transformation. And of course, the incentives are nice to have, but the longevity of them is really what was so differentiated in the Inflation Reduction Act. And why that matters for the industry is we are all very capital-intensive companies, capital-intensive industry, and having that long-term visibility to be able to invest in the manufacturing, to drive scale, to invest in innovation, and ultimately bring the cost down of all of these technologies is really critical to our long-term success. So here at COP28, one of the things that we are hoping to see is continued commitment to driving both demand and the incentives and having that long-term visibility so that we and others have the confidence to make those capital commitments to actually achieve the change that we must see in order to save the planet.
I'm going to mix it up. Pedro, why don't we go to you next? Tell us about your experience here at the COP and what you're hoping to achieve.
Sure. Well, it's my fourth COP, and I have found that each of them has been very different. But what I've enjoyed seeing is the increasing sense of urgency around acting. And so the idea of acting fast that is, really throughout all the posters, on the site here is just spot on. So with my EEI chair hat on, it's great to be able to lead our delegation. And frankly, we are here. And we, as you heard from Rebecca, as you heard from Scott's customers throughout EEI, we're investing. And the IRA, the IIJA are a big part of that. I think there's one other reason, though, for me, maybe at a more personal level, the ability to exchange ideas globally and see that there are things that we can bring to the table from our experience, but there are things we can take from the table from our partners around the world. That's just critical. So I love the excitement of it, and I hope that a few buildings over, we see real traction coming out from the real negotiations here.
I do too. So share that sentiment. Scott, tell us about your experience in the halls and outside, which has been nice to be able to be outside too.
No, you bet. And you just think about what's ahead of us, and if we've really got 20 years to grow the electricity supply by at least 50% while we simultaneously massively decarbonize it, there's not any one company that's going to do that. We really can't do it with just our company and our customers. This is going to be a series of public-private partnerships. The government's going to play a role. Policy really matters. I mean, Rebecca just hit on the IRA and otherwise. And you're not going to find much better platforms than this to really drive those adult conversations on what's required for us to get where we need to get to. So the diversity of the organizations we have here to just really have real talk on what we need to do next together. And it's going to take all of us if we're going to make the progress we need to make, is exactly why I love being here and why it's a really motivating series of days.
Right. Well, I mean, you just hit on it, and we're really showing this in real time with the partnerships that are possible. So, Rebecca, you talked a little bit about the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So I'll come back to you in a moment. Maybe Scott and Pedro, we can hear from you. How has that policy changed things at your leadership levels?
I'll go first. I mean, you take with the Inflation Reduction Act, in the last few weeks, we had our first 6 megawatt nacelle output out of our factory in Schenectady, New York. We started that right after the IRA, and I bring that one up for the symbolism. That's really where General Electric started. It's a factory that, from a historical perspective, was making gas turbines, steam turbines, and only with the Inflation Reduction Act did we have the confidence and the incentives over the medium to long term to go industrialize what was a steam turbine factory that's now outputting the largest nacelles in the U.S. for the U.S. market. So, I mean, that's just one example of many of just real action and action that could happen quickly, because it's only been a little bit over a year since the IRA was put in place. And that is $50 million investment, hundreds of union jobs that is going to create a lot of decarbonized power for the U.S. So one example, but an illustrative one of what the art of the possible is on a go-forward basis.
Great, thank you. Pedro, what's your thoughts?
We estimate that in California, we're going to see electric load go up 80% by 2045. So think, to Scott's earlier point, think about the level of investment that's needed and the cost. And it's going to put upward pressure on rates. There's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right, in terms of the benefits that I talked about earlier for consumers. But you got to get there first. And so what the IRA and IIJA are doing is bringing down that cost ultimately to the end-use customer. And some of that is happening to the tax credits that are flowing through renewables or through storage. I think Scott, it was a great example. I'll give you a different one. think about the end-use customer. The tax credit in the IRA for the $4,000 credit for used electric vehicles on an income-qualified basis. That's going straight to the consumer, and it's helping to make sure that the transition is an equitable one, that it's not just about people who can afford the bigger, more expensive EVs, but it's people who can only afford the second or third hand smaller electric vehicle. And so paired with the programs that a number of us have to help deploy charging in low income and disadvantaged communities, that is a force multiplier for the country, and that's what's so exciting.
Thank you. Rebecca, you get the last word on this topic, but certainly not the last word. We're going to be talking about it for the next 2 weeks, I'm sure.
I think innovation is one of the additional things I would add on the Inflation Reduction Act and IIJA. And that drive towards innovation really will make a difference for all these technologies. I was teasing earlier in my comments that we are at the hardest point, I think, or at least getting to the harder point of implementation of decarbonization. We've done the easier things. Now we need to start moving towards the harder things. And bringing costs down in that process is a key part of it. We've seen a reduction in wind and solar costs 80 and 60% respectively over the last 15 years. And that came from innovation and scale and manufacturing and experience. And we're starting to see the new technologies, whether they're in storage technologies, potentially small modular reactors, other forms of innovation that will help drive these costs and enable us to be able to achieve it. And I think that's a key part of the legislation that was enabled.
So we have just a couple minutes left, but I want to go back to the title of our event, Technology Triumphs. So just wondering if you could share briefly, and Rebecca, we'll start with you, just how are you seeing this work that you're doing provide global benefits?
One of the most exciting things for us, and this happened in the last 2 weeks, we started flowing green hydrogen into one of our combustion turbines here in Florida as a pilot project. It's the first of its kind in the U.S. We started producing green hydrogen just a couple of months ago, and in the last couple of weeks actually started to see the molecules. We couldn't see them, but we actually started putting the molecules through the gas pipeline and saw it in action. We have learned so much from actually implementing the technology, giving us more confidence about what we would do next if we're able to enable the scale. And I think that's one of the exciting things about, U.S. and about electricity. We've all been more local companies, Scott not as much, but, local companies for electricity because of the nature of electrons. And with the ability to turn those into molecules and participate in the decarbonization of a broader planet is really exciting from our perspective. And I think a great conversation clearly is just at the very nascent stages. We need a lot to happen for this really to become a reality. But nonetheless, on the first steps and in the last couple of weeks, a major milestone for us.
Thank you. Scott.
On the global side, I'd say, the sustainability does start with electrification, and it does start with the whole world having a right to have access to electricity. And a lot of what we're working on is going to be exportable to many parts of the world because it does start there, right? So a lot of our technology investments start with electrification, and then we're decarbonizing that goes with it, and that's going to benefit the whole world over time.
And I'll close it out really quickly by saying that we're seeing the benefits flow in things like the $1 billion, 500 plus megawatt project that we're completing on battery storage that's getting support from the IRA. But more broadly, this is about moving this technology that, again, we need so urgently. And yes, there's a price we're paying up front. IRA is helping to defray that price and bring the cost curve down. And so when I think about the fact that solar today is about 1/7 of the cost that it was 15 years ago, battery cells are now, probably about 1/10 of the cost that they were 10 or 12 years ago. We need that next with heat pumps. We need it with electric vehicles, and that's going to help make the transition affordable.
Well, thank you. I'm feeling triumphant. I hope all of you are too. So thank you to our excellent panel. Thank you for coming to Dubai and participating here at the U.S. Center. Everyone, let's give them a round of applause. Thanks.
And Scott and Rebecca as well, and Lisa for moderating a great panel. It's now my pleasure to introduce Nat Cohane, the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES. Matt's going to be joined in conversation in this panel by Amy Jake, Senior Vice President of U.S. Communications, Freyr Battery, Mark Reinbold, Vice President, Global Sustainable Infrastructure at Johnson Controls, and Jill Blickstein, Vice President of Sustainability at American Airlines. Nat, take it away.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks so much to Lisa and to Eric and BCSE and EEI for the partnership. Really pleased to be doing this event at the U.S. Center and back for COP. So we've got a great panel as well. You just heard from a number of companies at the CEO level. We have a number of CSOs from some other terrific companies really in the same theme of taking advantage of policy and also thinking about what needs to come next in order to get the investments we need. As Eric said, I'm Nat Cohan. I'm the president of Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and we work with business and policymakers on exactly this piece of how do we push forward and accelerate the transition to a thriving, just, and resilient economy. So with that, let's jump in. Amy, let me start with you. Freyr Battery is a Norwegian company that makes battery solutions for long-duration energy storage, electric vehicles, marine applications. John mentioned you at the opening. Tell us a little more about Freyr and, in particular, how the landscape has changed for investment in the U.S. A year after the Inflation Reduction Act.
Sure. And first, thank you for having me. It's an incredible opportunity to be up here. So I would start by thinking about the goals of COP. And one of the main goals that we've heard at this COP is the tripling of renewable energy, and by 2030. Now, Bloomberg NEF had a report that stated that the last time we did this, it took us 12 years. We're trying to do it in nearly half of that. That's daunting. But I want to be really clear, it's possible. But it's only possible if we go all in on renewables, if we really truly leverage wind and solar, and if we harness the full potential of batteries. And batteries are going to play a really important role, not only in grid resiliency, but in energy storage and in thinking about regional energy security as well. So there are a lot of reasons why batteries play a critical role. At Freyr, our mission has always been to decarbonize energy systems and transportation systems globally. And so we always thought about the U.S. market, and we're working towards that. But I can tell you very specifically that the IRA absolutely accelerated and expedited that plan. So we are a company that was previously or currently is domiciled in Luxembourg. By the end of the year, we will re-domicile to the U.S. as a direct result of the benefits of the IRA. We purchased 368 acres of land in Coweta County, Georgia, and we're going to build a gigafactory on that land. And the reason that the IRA is so important to companies like us and to others in this space, there's a lot of reasons, but I'll really quickly go through 4. The first is that when we think about industrial policy, this is a perfect application of industrial policy. We are trying to build nascent industries, and we need companies to take that chance. And so in order to do that, you have to incentivize them. And policy, industrial policy, is a really good tool to do that. The second is we have a runway, and that's really important because when we look at the global landscape, we are 10, 15, 20 years behind our competitors around the world, depending on who you ask and the time frame. But they have a learning curve. They've brought down the cost. They have technology innovations. For us to do that, we need support, and we need support at the public sector level, at the government level. The third is that it's not just a startup story with the IRA, it's a scale story. And I think that's really important because when you look globally around the world and you look at some of the responses, I think we're all united in the idea that we need to decarbonize. We're all united in saving the planet, but we have different ways of doing so. And in the US, it's a startup to scale up story. And that matters because it's not just the energy, it's not just the money you need in a capital-intensive environment to open a gigafactory. It's 45x incentivizes you, me, a battery producer, to produce batteries. And so when you think about the business challenge, it's not just starting, but it's ramping up. And the last element is that it's a signal. It's a signal to the market. It's a signal to partners. It's a signal to customers that we've got support. Uncertainty is one of the biggest single challenges we face in getting people to adopt and enact and change their behaviors. And what this says is that the government is behind us. So we are just one of many companies. A year in, I think there's something like 272 new projects, $278 billion in investment, and 170,000 jobs created from the IRA. So we are excited to leverage the opportunities. We think it's an incredible vehicle, and we hope that it's not just us, but it's an entire industry that takes shape because of the IRA.
Terrific. Thanks. And thanks for touching on that sort of much broader picture about the IRA and giving us a sense of scale. So Mark, let me turn to you. Johnson Controls produces technologies that enable buildings to be more efficient. And so talk a little bit about what's changing for the use of digital technologies, the deployment of digital because of those recent policy shifts, and where do you see those shifts happening in which industries?
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you, and thanks for having us here. As you've probably heard mentioned throughout the day, buildings are accountable for 40% of the carbon emissions worldwide, which means we got to take action and start taking very practical approaches to decarbonizing buildings right now. And we're all about, at Johnson Controls, taking intentions of our customers and of the world and turning it into action that we can deliver on right now. And digital is going to be a critical driver for doing just that. So if you think about what it takes to decarbonize a building, this is not easy work. You got to get into mechanical systems. You got to have engineers crawling through buildings. And historically, it's been a long and slow and sort of tedious process. And as we look at the power that digital is going to bring to that part of the market, digital is going to allow us to do much of that work that we did manually before, just using data that's already being collected by the systems that I'm looking up at in the roof of this building. So if we can make all of this system smart, use data to drive good decisions that then drive outcomes, we can for sure make a massive impact on the carbon emissions of buildings. The IRA has been a massive wind in our sails in decarbonizing buildings. And one of probably the most important things that it's done is allowing us to take much more advanced technology. So when I say it's hard to decarbonize buildings, there's a lot of things that have quick paybacks, but there's a lot of things that have very long paybacks. The IRA is starting to enable us to start to look at technologies like heat pumps. So a number of times those have been mentioned. Heat pumps and geothermal, right, being two of those that we're seeing emerge right now as technologies that we wouldn't have seen 5-10 years ago. They just didn't have the great payback that they do now, coupled with the IRA. So we're super excited about that. We're very, very grateful for our partnerships with the DOE and with the federal government, because they are driving some very, very innovative projects that are allowing us to showcase those technologies and leverage the power of the IRA.
Terrific. Thanks. So we've heard about the scale, we've heard about the scale up mentality and the digital technologies. Jill, let me go to you on American Airlines and sustainable aviation fuel, which has of course been a major focus of Americans, a key pillar of your investment to decarbonize. Curious about how you see some of the barriers to scaling up sustainable aviation fuel or SAF, and how does the IRA and the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure law, help to break down some of those barriers?
Well, let me just start by saying I'm sort of consumed with envy at this moment at the opportunities that all these other industries have, and how electricity how renewables have grown so much. You know, what Rebecca said about the reduction in what wind and solar cost has been so extraordinary. You know, aviation obviously is a hard-to-abate industry. We consume a massive amount of jet fuel, and today there's almost no alternative to jet fuel. There is a tiny, tiny bit of sustainable aviation fuel, which for everyone's knowledge today is made from waste fats and oils, so think like used cooking oil. There really are companies that drive around to restaurants and collect all the used cooking oil and make jet fuel out of that. So there's almost no SAF market today. I think before I turn to the IRA, and I guess I should say, I mean, American has a goal to reach net zero by 2050. We have a science-based target by 2035. The industry wants to decarbonize. We know we have to decarbonize, right? For us, it's existential, essentially. But we're going to need, to reach a net zero goal, we're going to need to be running on, let's say, 60, 70% SAF by 2050. And I just want to call out to the administration, they launched the SAF Grand Challenge, maybe 2 years ago. And what's really amazing about the SAF Grand Challenge is that it's 3 government agencies, U.S. Agriculture, Energy, and Transportation, who came together to work to produce 35 billion gallons of SAF by 2050, which will fuel the entire U.S. aviation industry. And I'm looking at Katie, who probably knows how crazy it is that like 3 federal agencies, instead of fighting with each other, are actually going to work together. And we're seeing it happen. And so that is terrific. And you're already seeing DOE and USDA already working together. You're seeing DOE put out grants. The DOE Loan Program Office is working on funding some new SAF startups. I can't quite be as rosy about the IRA. I mean, it is really exciting. We got our first ever SAF tax credit. And that had not existed. And we went to lobby for it about 2 years ago. Somebody on the Hill said to me, well, you're not going to get a new tax credit. Nobody gets a new tax credit. And lo and behold, after lots of work and lots of people coming together, we have one. But I want to harken back to what Rebecca said a couple minutes ago on stage about how the tax credits for renewables, they're very long duration. And long duration is what gives investors the confidence. They can really pencil that into the investments they're going to make. And that's what's going to lend to a lot of growth. The new SAF Blenders Tax Credit, while it's fantastic, right, it's 2 years in one form and 3 years in another form. And so, I think we're going to see a lot of people coming together to see if we can further enhance SAF policy. And in the meantime, I think all the airlines, including American, are looking into how we can contribute under our own power.
So, Jill, I want to build on a couple of things you said, and then have that as a sort of to set up the next part of the conversation, and maybe start with you and come back down. And the 2 pieces. The first is you mentioned American's net zero strategy, right, or your net zero commitments, and I know all the companies here and that we had before have those kind of really ambitious commitments. And you mentioned the need for policy to fill that gap, which I think is something we're increasingly seeing when we talk to our companies. No company can meet its net zero commitment on its own, right? It needs policy. It needs all the enabling policies like the IRA. But also, as you said, specifically for SAFs, but I think we probably would all agree, as great as it was, the IRA doesn't solve everything. And so what needs to happen next, or in addition, to help close that gap between where you can get to on your own and where you need the policies to help get to net zero? And maybe, Jill, I can start with you because you sort of gave a little bit of a teaser already of what's needed.
Right. You're totally right that we can't get there on our own. And when I say, we have a goal for net zero 2050, I immediately have to say, and we can't get there on our own, we need lots of collaboration. And one of the things we did this week was we're an anchor partner of Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. And Breakthrough Energy, if you may know, is the Bill Gates family of companies that's working to advance innovation. And Catalyst, in particular, is using flexible capital to advance a couple of core technologies. One of which is SAF, another is long duration battery storage, another is DAC, and then looking at steel and cement. And the very first equity deal that Catalyst did was announced this week, I think I don't know what day it is anymore. I think it was this week, in a company called Infinium, which is going to make sustainable aviation fuel using a new pathway, which is called power to liquid. And they're going to use waste CO2 from a natural gas plant with green hydrogen. And so again, I just have to harken back to how the government's supporting the growth of green hydrogen in the United States. And they're going to use a novel process to produce sustainable aviation fuel. It will be the first sustainable aviation fuel. First of all, it'll be the largest PTL plant in the United States, but more than that, it's the first SAF to be made using a non-bio feedstock, right? So that's just totally game-changing. And it's going to be super expensive. So the way American participated is we entered into a long-term fixed-price contract for this fuel and are entering into that contract, which we don't do for fuel, ever. I told people at the company what I wanted to do, and I could see heads spinning. But we entered into this contract because our contract made the project finance, is helping to make the project finance work. And so I think the heart of my answer to your question is we can't all be looking to the government for help. There has to be some kind of innovative public and private financing. And I'll tell you, look, the Catalyst guys are learning how to do this. It's hard. But it does take that mix of project finance experience, infrastructure experience, construction experience, risk management, and then lots of scientific due diligence to bring this to the point where that we were able to make a commitment like this.
So maybe Mark, next to you, are there other policies or other things that need to happen in the broader ecosystem beyond the IRA, or even just to meet the potential of the IRA and make it work?
You couldn't have set me up any better for that one. I mean, you talk about public-private partnerships. We see that as one of the most powerful vehicles that we can use in decarbonizing the building stock. So imagine, decisions that have been made for many, many years based on just pure energy ROI and economic payback on first cost basis. When we get into public-private partnerships and we have the right enabling legislation that goes with that, we can extend terms 30 up to 50 years. Imagine the work that you can do in a building and decarbonizing a building when you can extend that term out that long, coupled with local incentives and with the IRA. So we have a number of projects that we're doing today that just would have never, ever been possible without that enabling legislation along with the incentives. So, just to give one quick example, we did a project with Amtrak. So our Philadelphia station, 30th Street station in Philadelphia, we entered into a 50-year agreement to completely rehabilitate that building and take on all of the responsibility for the energy, decarbonization, and the operations of that building. That is powerful, and we need that enabling legislation to happen in every state and really kind of around the world.
Amy?
Well, I think they've said some really great things. I would add maybe two more things, which are a continued emphasis on R&D and innovation, and not just in terms of new technology. I think we always think, or a lot of people think about what's the next thing, but there's also the optimization of the current thing. And so to be able to put money into continued innovation in existing technology, just to figure out how to do it better or use that next gen technology, that's important. And the other thing I would say is green skills. If we're going to go through this shift and we're going to reach these goals, we're going to need another generation of leaders who truly understands how to deal with this new environment. And there are so many opportunities, but if we're not thinking about that generation who might be in high school, who might be in elementary school, who might be in middle school now, and we're not thinking about the tools and the knowledge base that they're going to need, then we're not going to be able to drive the change that we want in as effective of a way.
So that's another great segue. Let me pick up on that point to go to the next question. So, and I'll lead into that by building on what you said about skills. And to broaden that point, when we talk with companies about what needs to happen and with communities about what needs to happen to implement the IRA to accelerate that, the thing we hear back all the time is workforce, is skilled workforce development. And so that ties into the skills point. It also ties into, I think, a broader point about how do you all, I'm interested in how your companies think about ensuring that this transition is inclusive, that it's just. That's something obviously we think a lot about at the COP, the question about a just and inclusive energy transition, but it's also something I know the Biden administration has made a priority with Justice 40 and so on. So as you think about making investments, as you think about taking advantage of policies and making this transition, how do you think about that just transition piece? And I don't know, Mark, maybe I can start with you.
Absolutely. One of the things I am most proud of the work that Johnson Controls does is when we go into to a building, and obviously, I'm focused on buildings and building decarbonization. When we do a project, we will oftentimes build what's called a learning lab in that facility, vocational training program. So think about public housing, think about K-12 schools, think about correctional facilities. When we go in and do our work, we actually will build this kind of a lab and learning environment that starts to educate the folks that are in those underserved areas, right? So K-12 schools in underserved areas, especially thinking about corrections, So those learning labs then churn out our next generation of workers. And it's amazing to see the results. So in correctional facilities, where we've implemented this program as part of an energy efficiency project, think about this. Recidivism of those folks that went through our vocational program goes down to almost zero. So they're leaving with meaningful skills. They're leaving with a great paying job. And then in the work that we've done in like public housing, some of those, the folks that go through the program and get trained up, they're so highly in demand that we can't even get them hired back at Johnson Controls. So, I mean, the lift that gives a community and the training and the skill gap that it helps close is something that we're super proud of.
Wow, that's a great example. Jill?
Well, we're early in our energy transition. So I think what this question brought up for me and the way you phrased it was we're going to have to bring all of our young people into thinking about these jobs, and which to me, as maybe the oldest person on the panel, means bringing women into STEM and into scientific careers and into aviation. You know, aviation tends to be very male-dominated, so we're doing a lot of work with Cadet Academy and going into those schools that are turning out future aviators. Because if we can bring more women and a more diverse workforce in, we're going to get that innovation and set of ideas that in turn will help us decarbonize.
Terrific. Amy?
Yeah, so I think our chairman has this saying, which is decentralization, democratization, decarbonization. And to put it in the correct order, because I've just flipped it, the more that we can do to decarbonize, the more work that we can do specifically around bringing down the cost curve, the less expensive it is to access some of this technology, to access electricity. So when you can bring down the cost so it's more accessible, when you can take something like batteries, for instance, and apply it in a regional setting so that regional areas have more control over their own energy systems, then you've increased access, you've decreased costs, and you've democratized that to an extent that we may not see today. So I think from the battery perspective, that's one thing. But the DOE, if you are looking at the loan process, if you're thinking about the IRA, one of their strong commitments is to Justice 40. And it's a really important part of what they're trying to do to ensure that when you go into an area and you do build something or you create a business, that the benefits of that, not just that there's no harm done to counties or to towns in the surrounding area, but that the benefits are actually flowing through to a broader group of people than just the area in which you're operating. And so that's, I think, to me, that's a really strong signal from the government. It's a really good opportunity to continue to work together with partners locally. And so I think that's a good option.
Terrific. Thanks. So this will be the last question as we wrap up, but obviously we're sitting at a COP. We're sitting in the midst of the UN climate negotiations. So they're somewhere around here. It's easy to lose track of that with all the other side events going on. But this is, of course, a global challenge, right? And so we've talking about the U.S. and investment in the U.S. But one of the things we hear is that, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, that the IRA and IIJA, the investments that they help to catalyze, can also lead to greater investments globally in the energy transition. And you all of your companies serve global markets. And so I'm interested in some thoughts about the extent to which maybe the activities that the IRA or IIJA are helping to catalyze, or beyond that, the kinds of partnerships you mentioned, Jill. How does that play out in terms of accelerating investment globally? And maybe I'll go back to the original order. So Amy, start with you and go down the line.
Yeah. So I think what it does, so for us, we have something, our technology development center is in Norway right now, and that's where we're going to look at the batteries we're producing, next gen technologies. We're working with a partner, 24M, which is a spin out of MIT. And it's where we're looking at the technology itself, but we're scaling and producing in the U.S. Now, once we get to the point where we are operating at full capacity and we are cost competitive and we're able to take those learnings, then there are more opportunities to bring those learnings and to think about other locations globally. And I think talent, again, kind of going back to that, we may be starting with talent in this gigafactory here in the U.S., but the knowledge that we can create is something that we want to then transfer back. And we're doing the same thing, taking knowledge from Norway to the U.S. And so we envision that this becomes something that we work with other partners on, and we can help to just help the battery industry as a whole train another generation of leaders and apply that outside of the U.S. as well.
Mark?
For us, I think the IRA has done a couple things. Number one, it's really reinvigorated the public sector part of our energy efficiency business. So when you think about things like direct pay, all of a sudden now, we're revisiting, governments and schools with new technologies that just weren't possible before. And, that's allowing us to scale the business. Then, the investments that we're making in heat pumps, the investments that now are becoming available in renewable energy technology, especially again in the public sector and with the federal government, is allowing us to scale our workforce, scale our skill set, and then take that learning and apply it globally. Same thing with digital, right? All the things that we're learning about and driving higher and higher levels of efficiency in buildings here with platforms like our Open Blue platform. All of that has been made possible because of incentives, because of funding, and because of the scale we're building. So taking all that global, frankly, it's exactly what I've been asked to do, is take what we've learned in the U.S. and go drive that same methodology across the world for Johnson Controls.
Terrific. Jill?
Because my answer to this question isn't super positive. If anything, I think I hear that people who are going to be building projects outside the U.S., once the IRA came through, they thought about siting them in the U.S. So we may see some U.S. focus. But I think what I'd say about SAF is that there's a real feedstock issue, right? I mean, if you follow biofuels, there's a lot of controversy about biofuel feedstocks. And we're going to need all kinds of, I mentioned PTL earlier, we're going to need all kinds of pathways, all kinds of SAF coming to the fore. And we won't be left with, hopefully in the end we won't have to rely entirely on bio-based feedstocks, but we're going to need them to start to decarbonize if we're going to be on anything close to a 1.5 degree pathway. And so as soon as you start talking about feedstocks, if we do it the right way, there's lots of opportunity for growth in developing markets. But we have to do that the right way, and we have to develop the policy the right way. And we don't want to. The whole point of investing all of this money in SAF is we don't want to end up with a product that in the end is not friendly to the environment, right? Because then what have we really accomplished, right? But we're a member of the One World Alliance. We have. We're very active in IATA. There's interest from airlines all over the world in doing this, and I think everyone is trying to figure out how to work with their governments and civil society and figure out how to do the feedstock thing correctly.
So I think we're almost out of time. Let me just ask, as we quick, maybe we'll start with you, Jill, and come back down the line. Anything we missed? Anything we should be thinking about as we go? As we wrap up this panel for the next steps, how we take all of this momentum forward. We've covered a lot. We've covered a policy, and we've covered public-private investments and so on. But is there one thing we should be taking forward in terms of continuing to accelerate this and building on what's been done so far?
Well, I think we've learned so much from what's happened in renewables. I think what I'm learning is that making any progress requires partnerships that are very hard and mostly uncomfortable, and ask all of us to certainly ask me and our company to step out of our comfort zones and do things we never would have done before. And I think, so when you see something that looks a little bit crazy, that might actually be the thing that's going to work.
I love that answer. Thanks, Mark.
Simple answer for me is we have the technology, we have the capability, and we have the people right now to take action inside buildings and to drive energy efficiency, and we can do so much more right now. So the urgency, The need to take action couldn't be higher. And we, as we evolve, we're going to learn more. We're going to get better and better at this. But we are very good at decarbonizing buildings, driving energy efficiency, and making it have a positive ROI. Right? Energy efficiency is good business right now.
Well, they've got great answers. I guess I would just say, continued commitment and expressing that commitment from the government side, from partners, from investors, because there is a narrative out there right now around clean energy and the slowing down and whether or not the bubble has burst. And I don't think that's true at all. The rate of change, the rate of some new projects may have changed, but the future is happening. The energy transition is 100% happening. And the more that we can all publicly support that, commit to that, continue to express that, I think the farther and faster we'll go.
Well, that's a terrific note to end on. So let me thank Amy Jake, Mark Reinbold, and Jill Blickstein. And let me also, because I'm going to wrap it up for all of us, let me thank Pedro Pizarro, Scott Strazik, and Rebecca Kajawa, and as well as, of course, my partners in this, Lisa Jacobson and Eric Holdsworth of EEI and Lisa of BCSE. And of course, thanks. I know John had to leave, but it was great to have John Podesta here as well. Thanks to all of you for listening in. And I think this has been a great and very broad-ranging discussion around not only what the IRA and the IIJA and the policies are doing in the U.S., but how we take that globally. So thanks to you all, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you for our amazing panel.